Good afternoon. I am Donna Guerin, Executive Vice President of Science and Policy at the American Frozen Food Institute. Welcome to today's webinar, the third in the Sanitation Controls track of AFFI's Food Safety Webinar Series. During today's presentation, we will explore sanitation top 10 failures. This afternoon, we are delighted to have Michael Kramer with us. Allow me now to give a little bit of introduction of Mike before he gets started. He currently serves as the Director of Quality, Senior Director of Food Safety and Quality Assurance for Ajinomoto Foods North America, Inc. He has celebrated 25 years with the company. It's been under several different names during his 25 years. But this past October 2018, he celebrated 25 years with the company. Prior to that, he was with Swift and Company and was operations in poultry operations, processed meats and poultry, and corporate food safety and quality assurance. He is currently a member of the editorial advisory board of the Food Safety magazine. He also is a published author. In 2006, CRC Press published his book, Food Plant Sanitation, Design, Maintenance, and Good Manufacturing Practices. It is in its second edition, and the third edition is in its development stages. He is an active member of AFFI and has been vital in the creation of our AFFI Best Food Safety Practices that are at AFFIFoodSafety.org. So take a look at those. Mike did help with a lot of those references that we have there. So before we get started with today's webinar, I would like to turn it over to Sarah Brandmeier, AFFI's Manager of Scientific and Regulatory Affairs, for some housekeeping information.
Thanks, Donna. So today we will be turning it over to Mike, but we will also have a question and answer session. And since our live recording, we're doing a re-recording of that today, we did receive a few questions. So during that time, we will be covering those questions. So with that, Mike, I'm going to turn it over to you.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Sarah. Thank you very much, Donna. And again, I appreciate the opportunity to provide this information and present on what I consider to be a very important topic, which is food plant sanitation. Unfortunately, as many years as I've been in industry, I've also, in addition to encountering the upside and the good things that can happen with sanitation, there are also some of the downsides of sanitation, and sometimes things just don't go as planned. So I'd like to address some of the reasons why sanitation mishaps can occur. And in my years of experience, I've had about 40 years in the food industry, some of the reasons why these happen, and maybe some of the things that we can do as an industry to improve on those. So let's start with the first one. And if you're looking for a Dave Letterman top 10, this is probably not going to be funny, but I'll try to interject when I can. One of the first things that I believe results in challenges with the sanitation process starts with the sanitation crew. Now, I want to make it absolutely clear. I'm a big fan of the sanitation crew. I'm a big fan because these are individuals that are willing to come in typically in the middle of the night. They work in difficult conditions, sometimes in challenging positions due to the amount of water, the chemicals they use, that are temperatures that are used, the humidity that's created. So I want to make sure that the understanding is, if the sanitation crew is not adequately prepared, then the failure is not on them. It's on us as managers and as leaders of the company. Starting off with inadequate staffing. And I think one of the things that we need to do as company leaders is we need to make sure that the sanitation crew has an adequate number of people to do the job. And to do that, we need to look at the size of the facility. There's a difference between cleaning a 50,000 square foot facility and a 150,000 square foot facility. Just the footprint of the facility makes a huge impact. The second thing is the quantity and the complexity of the equipment. If you're just dealing with stainless steel tables, maybe a couple of conveyors, it's not as complex as if you're dealing with grinders, with blenders, with dispensers, with fillers, with scaling equipment, and the types of equipment that you have as to whether or not they are washed down or they need dry cleaning. This can impact the number of people that you need in the facility, as well as, did you factor in absences? One of the things that we encounter in some of our locations is we're in areas where there's a high level of competition for our people. Wages are a little bit higher in certain areas, and so we're competing with that. So you have to factor in, people may not show up because they're sick, people may not show up because they're on vacation, but they also may not show up because they've got a better offer. So staffing considerations need to be a priority. The second thing is the education of the staff. And I'm not talking about whether or not they've got a high school diploma, a GED, or whether they've got a college diploma. I'm talking about how we prepare individuals to do the job. A lot of times what we hear people say is, well, I've trained my staff. And the way that I like to, and the way that we in Ajinomoto like to look at that is, training is not sufficient, because typically with training, you're talking about the what and the how. What are they supposed to do, and how are they supposed to do it? And for those of you that are old enough, like me, you may recall an artist, a rock artist by the name of Warren Zevon, and he actually came out with an album called Sentimental Hygiene, which I thought was very appropriate. And one of those songs in that album was Even a Dog Can Shake Hands. And I'm certainly not comparing a sanitation crew to dogs, but we can train our dogs to shake hands. They know they're going to get a biscuit at the end, and so they do it, but they really don't know the meaning behind it. Why are they doing it? When we educate our staff, we're telling them the what and the how, but to educate them, we have to tell them the why. We have to make it personal and emotional. Why do they need to do an effective job of cleaning? They need to do that because we need to make sure that our food is safe, that we're not going to negatively impact the consumer of that food. That may include some of their family members and some of our staff. So we want to make sure that they understand why it's important to get the food facility clean and the equipment clean. Not just what they need to do and how they need to do it, but why, so that it personalizes it. And in a lot of instances, it's a good idea to provide a mentor, somebody, especially for a new person, it's especially important to have somebody who has done the job, who is understanding of the elements of the job. And that way they can show the individual what needs to be done, watch them do it, allow them to do it so that they're confident that the individual can do it, and then let them do it on their own, but come back periodically to make sure that that individual is consistently doing the job the way that it's expected. That's how we adequately educate our sanitation staff. In addition to that, we need to provide the proper tools for the individual. We need to make sure that they have the proper safety gear, the personal protection equipment, rain suits, adequate rain suits. This is a tough job, especially if you're in a facility where you have a wet cleanup that's being done. Dry cleanups may not require the same level of personal protective equipment, but if you're using hot water, steam, harsh chemicals, you need to make sure that these individuals have the proper rain suit, they have the proper face shield so that they're not getting chemicals in their eyes or on their faces. If they need gloves, the type of gloves that will protect them from the chemicals. We need to make sure that they have clean suits and dry suits. There's nothing worse than getting soaked and wet and working for hours in clothing that's wet, in boots that are wet. We have to make sure that we provide them with something to keep them comfortable on the job. In addition, we want to make sure that they have the proper hoses to do the job. I've been in locations, fortunately not Ajinomoto locations, but I've been in locations where they've been providing garden hose, not the proper sanitation type hoses. They are not provided with hose nozzles. They use their thumb to affect the water spray. It's our obligation as management of the company to provide the right hoses, the right nozzles to do the job so that we can reduce the amount of water that's utilized and not have it an excess amount of water, excess amount of pressure, proper buckets, and the proper scrub pads. And these would be scrub pads that are of a softer nature to prevent etching of the metal, because the more we etch the metal, the more difficult it is to clean it. The other thing that I think we need to do as leaders and managers is provide feedback to the sanitation crew on their performance. We want to share microbiological monitoring data, whether it's ATP monitoring, generic microbiological monitoring, or environmental monitoring, if we're monitoring for Listeria species in the environment or even Salmonella in the environment. We want to make sure we provide that feedback to them, particularly if that data is collected at pre-op. They need to know how they are performing, coupled with how do we improve that performance. We also need to make sure we share pre-operational inspection results, USDA NRs, and audit results. So if the sanitors are turning the equipment and the environment over to, say, for example, food safety and quality assurance personnel to do pre-op inspection, then they need to understand what the results of those pre-op inspections are. Now, the sanitation crew, somebody in that crew should be doing a pre-op before they turn it over to QA to do the official pre-op, because the sanitation crew does need to take ownership of the sanitation process. But I think that if they get that information, particularly if we end up getting, if it's a USDA facility and we end up getting NRs, that's going to help them to understand, especially if we trend where those findings are. That's going to help them to understand how to do their job better. And if we have auditors coming in, whether they're third-party auditors, customer auditors, or even regulatory audits that are conducted, if it's a food safety assessment by USDA and they come in to do pre-op, or if the FDA comes in to do a pre-op inspection, we need to make sure that those audit results are fed back to the sanitation team, especially if those are positive, if those are good news type of results. We want to make sure that they get recognition. And that's my final point with regards to the crew. We want to make sure the sanitation crew gets enough recognition. They work late hours. There's not a lot of times when managers come in. And if you're a manager, whether you're a plant GM, FSQA manager, or even a sanitation manager, come in periodically and meet with the crew. Let them know how they're doing. Let them know that you understand the conditions they're working in. Make sure that they are shown appreciation for their efforts. I think it'll go a long way. And I know a lot of times we'll do pizzas for them, we'll do parties for them, but I think they need the verbal feedback to say, thank you, you're doing a great job, and make sure that they understand that it's appreciated so that they don't feel like they're disconnected from the rest of the team. This is still their company, and you want to make sure that they recognize that. I think addressing the sanitation crew is the first thing that a company needs to do to make sure they don't have these types of sanitation failures. The next area of concern is the facility and the equipment condition. And this would include sanitary design of the equipment. A couple of the examples that I've shown here are of the first picture that's on the left-hand side is a sandwich plate that's bolted together at the end of a leg of a piece of equipment with a wheel attached. And I'm I'm pleased to say it's not in an Ajinomoto plant, but this is something that we do find periodically. These are difficult to clean. Those sandwich plates where you have two metals coming together are extremely difficult to clean. You cannot clean in between them. We need to make sure that those wheels are either directly connected to the metal, or if a sandwich plate has to be used, those plates are separated so that you can clean in between. And if you notice too, those are two incompatible materials. The top is stainless, the bottom is probably a high iron content piece of metal, and so now you have rust that's forming even with the stainless steel. The second picture is one where the metal, the stainless steel, has been, for some reason, it's been etched. It's been intentionally etched. And I know I've seen this in some of the airports where there are stainless steel panels where they etch it for an artistic design. A food plant doesn't need to have that type of artistic design. We want to make sure that we're not creating situations where it's difficult to clean and etched surfaces are difficult to clean. Poor welds, rough welds, are also difficult to clean. Hollow tubing, especially when it gets cracked or it's not sealed, it's improperly welded, those all become harborage points. And ultimately, all of these sanitary design issues make it more difficult for the sanitation crew to clean. That is a sanitation failure. This can lead to NRs. This can lead to harborage niches. This can lead to the creation of biofilms. This can eventually lead to release of microorganisms that can affect the safety of the product or the shelf life of the product if you're dealing with perishable goods. So sanitary equipment design is extremely important to making the sanitation process easier and more effective. And fortunately, there are references on the AFFI website on sanitary design. There's a very knowledgeable team. One of the resources we have is Joe Stout, and I've known Joe for a number of years, and he's one of the most knowledgeable individuals with regards to sanitary design. So if you need resources and reference documents, I'd highly recommend you look at the AFFI website, because we do have those available, and Donna or Sarah can provide some additional information to access that. When talking about cleaning procedures, cleaning and sanitizing procedures, it's extremely important that those are well thought out and they are designed properly. Whether you're wet cleaning and following the 7 steps of sanitation, or you have a dry facility where you don't add water and you're using there's typically 5 steps to dry sanitation. But one of the most frequent challenges is not doing a dry pickup prior to the cleaning process. And so if we do have a sanitation process that identifies the 7 steps, that first step needs to be doing a dry pickup prior to using any type of water, any type of soap, because you don't want to have soils that have accumulated around the equipment or around the floors that make it more difficult. Then once you start applying water, you may be even creating some insanitary conditions depending upon how greasy or oily those materials are. Start with the dry pickup, and then the next challenge that I've seen with regards to the actual cleaning process is not cleaning from the top down. I've seen facilities where they start at the bottom and rinse up, and that's really not the way you want to clean. You want to rinse from the top down. You want to apply your foam from the top down. Let gravity take effect and help bring that water down along the equipment, that foam down along the equipment. The second thing is using the wrong chemicals for the soils that you have in your plants. And different soils may require different chemicals. for cleaning. If you have fryers, that is going to require a different type of chemical than what you would be using, say, for example, on a line that is where you're running raw meats, or you're running raw vegetables, or you're running further processed items. There are different chemicals required for different soils. And so you want to make sure that you're discussing this with your sanitation manager, who hopefully has some expertise in this area, your chemical provider. And one of the things with chemical providers that you want to ask yourself, am I dealing with a provider that's only coming in and telling me, okay, you used this much chemical last month, I'm going to order this much more for you? Or do they provide service too? Do they have the ability to provide you with technical expertise that says, you're using the wrong chemical for this application, you're using it at the wrong concentration levels. Here, let me show you how you need to apply this chemical. It's really important that your chemical provider provides you service as well as sales. Another factor that we see sometimes with regards to cleaning procedure failure is where we have excess water pressure, or we have a water temperature that's too high for the application. Excess water pressure, and I see this where the pressure is so high that all you're doing is you're either blowing soils from one piece of equipment to another, one line to another. You are damaging the equipment. I've seen equipment damaged. I've seen electrical panels that have gotten water inside, which ultimately leads to a problem with delayed startups, because you're damaging the equipment, you're damaging electrical panels. So you want to make sure your water pressure is sufficiently low that you're not creating aerosols, but of a sufficient volume to do the job. Don't want to use excessive water pressure on floors and drains, because all you're going to do is aerosolize soils that come off the equipment, that are on the floors, and that get back onto the equipment. The temperature of the water also is very critical, and we like to keep it around 130, 140 degrees, but no higher than that, because the higher you get, the more you can create adhesion. You literally bake soils onto the equipment. Once you do that and they become more difficult to remove, now you have the beginning phases of what can become biofilms. Now, biofilms can also form because we are not providing mechanical action for cleaning the equipment. What I mean by that is we are not taking the light pads and scrubbing the equipment. I liken it to washing your car or brushing your teeth. If you hose your car off, even if you just apply the soap to the car and then you rinse the soap off the car, you're going to see a soil film on your car, road dirt. You're going to see different things on your car. You need to wipe it off the car. If all you do is use mouthwash at the end of the night and rinse mouthwash in your mouth, I guarantee you when you go to the dentist, he's going to say you had a tartar buildup. A tartar buildup is very much like a biofilm buildup. It is remnants of food particulate. It is naturally occurring materials that are released by your mouth, and eventually that builds up. The way you remove that, you brush your teeth, you floss your teeth. The same thing with equipment. You use scrub pads to help remove the buildup from the equipment so you don't have biofilms. And finally, with regards to cleaning procedures, would be the use of water in a dry environment. So if you're making things like spices, or you're making things like breaders or batters, where you keep that environment dry, you don't want to use water. Water can result in the growth of harmful microorganisms that can either create a food safety hazard, or they can create a reduction in the shelf life and the usability of those materials. So you want to make sure that your sanitation procedures, your cleaning procedures are designed to make sure that at the end of the cleaning process, you have removed the soils, you've minimized the opportunities for sanitation failures, and you've not created a hazard that can carry on through your process. I haven't touched on master sanitation here, but you also want to look at your master sanitation program as to whether or not you have adequately identified those things that do not have to be cleaned on a daily basis, but still require cleaning on a periodic basis, so that they do not contribute to an insanitary condition in the environment. Once you have cleaned the facility, then you want to conduct pre-op inspection. And some of the things that I've seen in locations where there is an ineffective pre-op inspection starts with an over-reliance on USDA inspectors, or even the FSQA pre-op inspectors, and you create what we have referred to as a bucket brigade. And that is the inspector starts to walk through, points out the different things that still need to be cleaned, and then you go back and clean them again. This is not effective because that means you have not done a good job of cleaning the plant. It also may result in delays to the production startup. Sanitation failures don't just include, do I have microbiological or allergen concerns? Sanitation failures can also be limitations that are placed on your ability to start the production process on time. And that leads to inefficiency, and that leads to additional costs to the company. Inspectors who are not fully educated on the objectives of pre-op inspection can result in a sanitation failure. And an example of that would be where the inspector is not trained and educated to look both at eye level but also beneath the equipment, on top of the equipment, where they're trying to look at too many pieces of equipment in the room. You may be able to get by with a statistical sampling. You got 20 pieces in the room, look at 5 pieces. If all 5 pass, you move on to the next area. If 2 out of the 5 fail, then maybe you want to go back and relook at more equipment. But you want to educate your pre-op inspectors on the objectives of pre-op so they are best prepared. And to do that, you also want to make sure you provide them with the proper inspection tools. At a minimum, they should have a very good flashlight, a high-power flashlight that allows them to see into areas of the equipment where it may be difficult to see with the room lighting that's available. You also can provide them with a polished stainless mirror, especially one that's on one of those extended poles, so they can adequately look at the undersides of equipment. Sometimes when equipment is cleaned, we do a good job of cleaning the surfaces on the top, the surfaces on the side, but we don't look at the undersides. So we want to make sure that they can see that so that they can adequately make sure that those are properly cleaned. If we're not using ATP or generic micro to verify the sanitation process is effective and ultimately use that data to validate that your sanitation procedures are effective, then I think that can result in a sanitation failure. If you do not have some type of data that can be used to show that your process is effective, then you're not going to be able to make improvements. And we really like to use ATP. We especially like to have the sanitation crew use ATP so that they understand whether or not they've done an effective job. And of course, what you're looking for with ATP is the presence of organic material, not necessarily bacteria. It could be the presence of food soils that are left behind. ATP is a great tool because the equipment is well designed. Most of the equipment is well designed. It can withstand the conditions in the facility while there's still some sanitation processes going on. The results are very rapid and they provide you with good data very quickly. Whereas generic micro, you still want to do that, but it's going to be a couple of days before you have the results. So I highly recommend a combination of ATP and generic micro to help provide you with the data that you can verify your processes are effective. But again, make sure that data is fed back to the sanitation crew. And one of the other failures that I see, and again, this is one of those that can affect plant startups, and that's conducting pre-op inspection before you apply the sanitizer. A failure is applying the sanitizer, then doing the inspection, and then finding out that you have to clean the equipment again because there are soils left behind. Now you've sanitized the equipment, you've taken the time to sanitize the equipment, you've used sanitizer, you've used time, and you got to go back and clean. So our recommendation is always do the pre-op before you apply the sanitizer, because once you've done the pre-op and the equipment is clear, you apply the sanitizer, you set up, and you start working. And that is one of the more efficient means of conducting your sanitation processes. With that, I'd like to conclude. I hope I've covered this adequately. Again, I appreciate the time and the opportunity, and we'd certainly like to answer any questions. And again, thanks everyone for your participation.
Thanks, Mike, for that excellent presentation. I'd like to open up the question session now. We have a few questions that were submitted after the first run of our webinar. So I'll let Sarah read those.
Great, thanks, Donna. So Mike, so one of the questions we received was, as a single production line startup facility, what would be the correct number of swabs that should be taken after cleaning?
That's a really good question, and that is one that when you look at regulatory documents regarding swabbing, and of course, depending upon whether you're talking about ATP swabs, generic micro swabs, or environmental swabs, you won't find that in a regulatory document. What you'll find is it's sufficient to make sure you have data to adequately support your sanitation processes. I think the answer to that is, number one, the complexity of the single line. So, for example, if it's a simple operation with minimal pieces of equipment, I would start out taking more swabs, a larger number of swabs. And again, I realize I'm being a little bit vague here, but it really depends upon the number of pieces of equipment, the complexity of those pieces of equipment, and the types of soils that are left behind. But if you have equipment that has a lot of moving parts, if you have equipment that, as you assess it, does not seem to have a good sanitary design, if you're finding rough welds, if you're finding hollow tubes, if you're finding sandwich plates or overlaps, I would start out with a very robust, large number of swabs. And then as I generate my data or as I improve on the nature of the equipment, I would then be able to reduce it. I can't give you a statistical formula, but I would say take a large number, maybe start off with 50 swabs, determine whether or not you have an adequate picture of the impact of your sanitation. Then you can go down to a reduced number of swabs over time as you generate the data.
Great, thank you. Our next question is, as a dedicated vegetable production line, would an ozone system be beneficial as a preventative measure during line downtime or breaks?
One of the things that I like about ozone is that it's very effective against microorganisms, and it is not going to impart any type of odor or flavor to the vegetables. And one of the things we have to be concerned with vegetables is that they can tend to absorb chemicals such as chlorine and impart that flavor. So I really like ozone for that application. The second thing is it is very environmentally friendly, because by the time it gets down to the drain and travels down through the drain, it's basically broken down. It's back to hydrogen and oxygen in its normal state. It's basically water, so I really like it. Ozone generation equipment can be a little bit expensive. It also needs to be close to the point of application because, again, Ozone is not a stable compound, and so it can break down quickly, but for vegetable application, really like ozone. There are a number of different chemicals that we like to use, but ozone is a very good one.
Great, thanks, Mike. Our last question is, what are the best sanitation training formats or classes to provide to team members so they can be as effective as possible on the job?
There are a couple of universities that we like to send our sanitation managers to, and we've even taken a couple of sanitation supervisors. And Sarah, I'm very, very pleased to say that one of the best in the country is at Penn State University. So we send people, they have a 2-day sanitation course there, and we like sending the people out there. And of course, they get the benefit of being in the beautiful little town of State College. The
Happy Valley.
Absolutely, we are. We also like to use Alchemy. Alchemy has some very good sanitation programs that can be used very effectively for the team. And so we have access to that in all of our facilities. But one of the other things that I like to do is supplement those with internally developed programs. And the reason why I say that is because if you develop that internally, you can take pictures of your equipment, you can take pictures of the sanitors, you can show them some of the areas that are more difficult to clean. That is a very effective means. And then, of course, you can reach out to AFFI. I know that we have a lot of materials that are online that can be utilized for effectively developing sanitation processes, monitoring processes, and sanitary design. So I think those are 3 of your larger resources. I know there are a couple of other colleges and universities that have good sanitation courses. I would certainly recommend looking online to find some of those.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Mike. And thank you again, Mike, for joining us for our webinar. We really do appreciate your time and your expertise. So we will be sharing the presentation slides and recording in a follow-up email to all registrants of this webinar. So with that, we will conclude, and thanks again, and have a great day.
Thank you. You too, Don. Sarah, thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity. Have a great day.
Thanks, you too. Bye-bye.
Bye.